Sure.
Well, Matt, let's start with you. What have you seen in the last week? I wanted to just run through about the last week. We do this every Thursday. What's been going on the battlefield from your perspective, and what is the let's call it state of play, for lack of a better word, in terms of what's going on across Ukraine?
Sure. Well, in the past week, as you kind of alluded to, it seemed to be a regrouping effort on both sides, on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. In particular, the Ukrainians would have been focused on getting as much weaponry as possible into their hands, and to try and move their troops from the northern portion of Ukraine into the eastern sections to try and hold the line, if you will. To hold the line against the Russian push, if you will. In the past 24 hours in particular, there are certainly reports that Mariupol, for all practical purposes, have fallen to the Russians. From a large or a big picture perspective, it's certainly going to be a morale hit to the Ukrainians, but it's at least tactically speaking, not going to amount to too terribly much. This was kind of a foregone conclusion, since the cavalry wasn't going to be coming over the hill to save the Ukrainian troops in Mariupol. So I think that's certainly one reason why in the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian government has announced that they're going to focus on destroying the Kerch Strait Bridge, which is the bridge that links Crimea with mainland Russia. So by the Ukrainians declaring that they're going to focus on destroying that, they are certainly drawing attention away to the fact that Mariupol, for all practical purposes, has now fallen. But at the same time, though, too, they're also essentially goading the Russians to move troops from the southern portion of Ukraine to try and bolster the defenses of the Kerch Bridge itself, which, whether or not the Ukrainians actually do end up attacking the Kerch Bridge, it is nonetheless a brilliant move. It should, in theory, move troops from the southern portion of Ukraine into the Crimean area. And if the Ukrainians don't attack it, then more power to them. It certainly helped weaken the defenses, or weaken the forces of the Russians at the very least. So I think in the past week itself, that's kind of what we're looking at the moment. I haven't seen any Russian movements through the Ukrainian line of defense. They really haven't been able to push through it, which is certainly good news for the Ukrainians, but the Russians are certainly trying at this point.
Let's go through those points one by one there. First of all, Mariupol has fallen because Putin, dramatic staged event where he's getting an update from Secretary or Minister Shoigu, saying, "Hey, we've got the entire Azovstal steel plant surrounded. There's 2,000 fighters in there, plus I guess at least 1,000 civilians." And Putin sitting there nodding, clutching his desk like he's about to throw the desk somewhere. And then at the end of it, he says, "No, I command you not to storm the factory, because we want to be very sparing with the lives of our men," which is great. I'm glad they finally came to that conclusion 58 days into the war, as if that order hadn't been given or that sentiment wasn't communicated properly. He seems to be showing some extreme sensitivity now. But really, Mariupol has not fallen, because they've just decided, well, if we go into the steel factory, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath, because these guys are not surrendering. They've still been destroying tanks through the last week. We've seen multiple videos of that. So I'm going to take issue with the fact that saying it's fallen, because I think that's a Putin talking point. Let's talk about.
I think you're right. I think it kind of depends on how you're defining fallen, and the reason why I characterize it as such is with so many fighters largely focused in the bunker itself. There's not really too terribly much they can do with regards to the defense of the city. There, as you mentioned, they can certainly do one-off sort of attacking tanks and such, but for the rest of the city itself, I mean, it's largely fallen to the Russians.
Well, so this is why Putin, just because you say it doesn't mean it's so. He wants it to be so, that it's fallen, because he has the remnants of 12 battalion tactical groups in the city that are being tied down by this one garrison.
Sure. Yeah.
And he wants to maybe rest and refit them, probably not, knowing the way they do things, probably just throw them straight up into the Donbass trench lines and try and effect a breakthrough. But this causes some real issues, because Dave, what happens? Let's bring you into this. What's going to happen if you don't? Well, first of all, it's a 5-kilometer square facility in urban environment with underground tunnels. I would imagine that garrison can do some serious damage to troops that are left behind in the city. So you either have a cordon of a 5-kilometer, which you have to seal it off. Putin promised not to let a fly out, and you have to seal it off with, Dave, how many, like, what would be the force requirements to properly seal that off, knowing they also have a coastline too, which is probably how they're getting resupplied.
Right.
I know that this garrison is not just there surviving on fumes. They're getting resupplied every night somehow.
I think the closest thing you could recently compare it to would be Sadr City. Roughly same size. And if you look at the combat power, the United States committed to Sadr City in 2007, 2008, it was about 23,000 soldiers committed to clearing Sadr City. And it never got
clear it. What about surrounding it?
Right. To surround it, it's going to take, a division. I'd say 10 to 12 BTGs just to surround the steel factory.
Okay.
Let me back that up. I'll take 7 to 8 because figuring the coastline, they're not going to put BTGs out in the water. That wouldn't work so well. But that opens up the question of how they do contain the maritime, right? It is the Sea of Azov. It's not the Black Sea, so it already has some natural containment to it. But it's like, as you noticed, it's still porous.
Yeah,
it's still getting through, and coastlines are really hard to contain. But regardless, you're looking at U.S. British equivalent 2 to 3 brigades worth of combat power just to cordon off the steel factory, and that just gets the surface. We're not even talking subsurface, like as you mentioned. And you look at the Azov Battalion, you look at the Marine Brigade that's in there. They know at this point, they know every square inch of that facility. They know super surface, subsurface, routes in and out. They've rehearsed the routes in and out. They've rehearsed the routes to the coast. This is very well developed for them. So this is not an easy task. Should they ever decide to go in there and remove Ukrainian forces.
Well, Matt, what would you say as an intelligence officer who also makes these estimates? How many battalions do you think is required to actually, as Putin promised, because we know he does everything he says he promises on these things, to seal it off, so that not a fly can get.
That's short answer is that's a difficult question to answer, simply because the current makeup of Russian battalions themselves, especially in the area, is just to get a firm grasp on what those battalions look like is very difficult. And arguably, even the Russian Ministry of Defense doesn't have a 100% accurate picture on what those battalions look like, because on paper, a lot of those battalions from their commanders were either 80 to 100% full, when in reality, some intelligence or some news reports that I've seen had mentioned that they were only like 50% full, and that was before fighting actually even began. So just putting a number on it itself is going to be kind of difficult to do.
Let's go full strength, or 80% strength Russian battalion. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not lying. They took no casualties.
Which is always that's always a dangerous thing to do. Really
good battalions.
if I had to go out on a limb and say that, I'd probably say 12 to 14 at the very least. The facility itself is massive, as you mentioned, and then you're also getting involved of what do you need to even hold the city itself with the population that's in there and those who are going to be conducting sabotage attacks. So I would probably say, at least 12 to 14, 100%, these are fresh guys kind of thing. I mean, this is certainly a difficult thing. Yeah, but at the same time though too, I mean, a certain majority of the city seems to have be in Russian control outside of the bunker itself.
Oh no, and that is clear. In
Yeah.
fact, there was an operation yesterday where with armored vehicles, incredibly, the Marines or Azov broke out and rescued or linked up with another 500 border guards from the port of Mariupol and brought them back in. So this is like the American Alamo forming, where we're going to have, I mean, it's already legendary, I think, in military history lore, but I don't think the Mariupol story's finished by a long shot. Those guys are, not only they haven't surrendered and Putin's just decided to seal it off like it's just some bad medical case that your hope's going to go away, but they're still posting on social media every day. And the morale boost that me, as not even a Ukrainian, and this is my home, that's where my fiance and I live, we want to go back to, it's huge just to see that these guys are doing that, and the stories that are going to come out of this, the legends that are going to be, I think, told for generations because of this are powerful. And for Putin just to say, well, we've surrounded it and that's an easy thing, as if, well, why didn't you do that before? So I think what's going to happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, it certainly seems like his strategy, if you will, at the moment is there's a certain amount of hope involved in it. At the very least, I think he's hoping that he can starve them out. I think whether he's actually being fed the appropriate information, or if his own military leadership is feeding him this notion that they do have it surrounded and they have everything cut off. In under those circumstances, I think I can see him thinking that the best way of doing this is simply to starve them out if he genuinely believes that they don't have a means of resupplying themselves.
And just let's split the middle. Let's be really generous. That might take 8 to 12 battalion tactical groups that actually have real manning to seal that off from just the land side. And knowing the way the Russians are operating, and probably the reason why they wanted to declare victory, they're probably going to leave, I would say, 3 or 4 battalions, maybe, back there to try and pull this off.
Yeah, that's what I've seen with regards to reports, is that generally they would probably want to leave at least 4 in the city itself once they have full control over it. And as you mentioned, I mean, these guys have been fighting there for 6 to 8 weeks at this point. I mean, these guys are exhausted. So for them to be moved to another portion of the country to continue, the push forward, it's highly unlikely. Let's put it that way.